The Portuguese were the first European nation to establish bases within India in the 16th century, but by the mid-17th century they had been joined by the English, Danish and Dutch. The French on the other hand arrived comparatively late, setting up their first bases in the 1670s. These settlements were largely ran by the nation's East India companies, and because they were commercial ventures they rarely fought one another in the late 17th and early 18th century, except during the 9 Years' War when the Dutch temporarily occupied French Pondicherry in the 1690s. But in 1740 the Austrian War of Succession broke out in Europe, putting Britain and France at war, yet no fighting took place in India until 1746. Initially the British harassed French supply lines, but as this proved inconclusive the fleet retreated to Bengal, leaving the Coromandel coast undefended. Anwar-ud-din Khan of the Carnatic had warned the Europeans not to fight in his territory, so the French, just looking to oust Britain from the region, promised him Madras and attacked the city. But after taking Madras, Joseph Francois Dupleix refused to hand it over, so Anwar-ud-din Khan tried but failed to take it from the French. The British then tried to take Pondicherry in 1748, but the siege was lifted just before the Austrian War of Succession came to an end. The French agreed to give Madras back to Britain in exchange for North American territories, however both soon got involved in proxy wars in India. In Tanjore, which was a kingdom within the Carnatic, a claimant to the throne requested British aid, but the small British expedition ended in failure. And in Hyderabad, Muzaffar Jung was removed from power through a coup led by his uncle Nasir Jung. Joseph Francois Dupleix allied himself with the deposed Muzaffar Jung in Hyderabad, and in the Carnatic they backed Chanda Sahib, the son of a former ruler who hoped to take over the state for himself. The British on the other hand forged an alliance with Nasir Jung in Hyderabad and maintained their alliance with Anwar-ud-din Khan. The French and their allies won a decisive battle at Amber in 1749. This allowed them to expand their holdings and make Chanda Sahib the new ruler of the Carnatic. However, in Hyderabad, both claimants to the throne had died by 1751, so Salabat Jung became the new uncontested ruler. And in the Carnatic, Anwar-ud-din Khan died, and his successor Muhammad Ali Khan Walaja was besieged by the French in Trichinopoli. So in 1751 the British under Robert Clive counterattacked and captured the city of Arcot without fighting. The French and their allies tried to reclaim the city but were beaten back. So as Dupleix was brought home, the French agreed to hand over their acquired land in 1754, and Britain's allies were free to rule over the Carnatic. However, in the peace the ruler of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah, grew suspicious of the Europeans' increased fortifications and wealth in his territory. So in 1756 he attacked the small British settlement of Calcutta. But the 7 Years' War broke out the same year, and Britain and France were at war once again. The British, looking to remove both the French and Siraj-ud-Daulah from Bengal, found allies within the Bengali court. Then, after winning a decisive naval battle, they captured the French settlement of Chandannagar. But despite recruiting some Hindus, they still only had a couple of thousand troops when they met the Bengalis at the Battle of Plassey in June. The Bengalis on the other hand had an army of tens of thousands and French equipment, but they too had been weakened. Constant maritime invasions had dwindled their numbers, and many troops had been stationed in the west to defend against a possible invasion from the Afghan Durrani Empire. Plus the Bengalis had brought Mir Jafar with them to the battlefield, and he, along with thousands of troops, defected to the British. This allowed the British to win the Battle of Plassey, and Mir Jafar was installed as a puppet ruler of Bengal. The British then moved south and successfully prevented the French from taking Madras in early 1759. However, in Bengal, Mir Jafar hoped to assert his independence from Britain, so forged an alliance with the Dutch, who had remained neutral during the 7 Years' War. But in 1759 the British quickly defeated the Dutch at Chinsura, and replaced Mir Jafar with his son-in-law, Mir Qasim. Meanwhile, to the south, with the French lacking funds and supplies, the British captured Pondicherry in 1761. But back in the north, Mir Qasim also fell out of favour with the British, so Mir Jafar was reinstalled as ruler in 1763. The deposed Mir Qasim, however, forged an alliance with Mughal generals and rulers of nearby states like Oudh, and with around 40,000 men they tried to oust the British from Bengal. The Allies, however, were too disjointed to coordinate their attack, and they lost to a much smaller British army at the Battle of Buxar in 1764. This allowed the British East India Company to annex Bengal and parts of the east coast, becoming a dominant power in India, but the French also maintained some settlements in India as well.